reports, and everything that is not captured within the what you can within the simplistic paradigm, or the unidimensional space, or the word I'm looking for is not automatic. It is within it's sort of mechanical space of strict ritual suddenly becomes relegated to the discretion of the executive, the discretion of power. So all the space where jurists are supposed to use their, people are supposed to come in with, economics, public planning, whatever the things that people are supposed to actually exert efforts in thinking about, is just given to be trusted to those in power. It's none of our business. Let those in power take care of it. As long as the appearances just are compliant, so as long as you don't call it interest, you don't call it riba, you call it profits or whatever, just make the world in a very unidimensional fashion, in a very superficial fashion, Islamically compliant, and we're home free. And of course the impoverishment and the death of Islam as well. I often feel that considering what a lot of the traditions about the narratives you read about the reformers lecturing on mountains, just in case for the birds to hear them, or the passing shepherd to hear them, because their people have made them outcasts. Considering the importance of the message, it is at this stage, at this point in history, it is a very difficult contextual position to be in, because you are going against massive currents and massive interests of a whole universe, but at the same time you have no choice but to attest to what is, because it's like when the Quran speaks about the truth, when people hear it, you know it. You know it's true, and it innately they feel it's true. They might later on introduce all types of excuses why or even say we don't want to think about it. Oh, it's too hard. And create all types of distractions. But at the moment they hear it, it is unmistakable. The moment you hear it, you can tell as you read the faces and eyes of people. They know that they hear the reality about their own tradition, and their own religion, and that is, it's your privilege and your burden. Okay, so tomorrow we will focus on the place of tolerance in Islam, and it would be fitting and wilder. So do read his. It's quite upsetting, but do read it. I actually was quite disturbed by it. I just it smelled. The evil has this distinctive feel to it, and it felt like something that the shaitan would be so excited about.
I think it's also, in my opinion, important to see the shift. Mostly in European countries, the right wings, they have a big vote. I think not only in Netherlands, because my professor said that when he speaks in the parliament, he speaks harshly about everything, not only about Muslims. But I don't know, still he got the vote.
No. Read this or look at his website, and you know that all of these are like the self-deluding yourself. It's like lying to yourself when you say something like that, because that's nonsense. I mean, his whole tirade is against Islam as a distinct and particular threat to Europe and a particular evil. I mean,
There's a very distinct atmosphere, I have to say, here, just living here a year and a bit, that I see here and that I've encountered personally. But of just tension on, and it's in this country it's a little bit covered over, and you know there's nobody knows. I mean, the stuff that we're discussing, the subtlety of how things change in the Muslim religion, people don't know this. What they do is they develop an aggression towards women that wear hijab, for example, which is really upsetting to see, because you see that these young women don't even sometimes catch on.
Right.
You know, maybe because they're used to it, but the atmosphere is very strange here, and it has shifted a little bit, because it used to be this obsession with veils, like a year and a bit ago, and when I was last living in England, you know, it was veils, and now it's just it's moved in other directions, but it's the same.
It's the same.
It's the same thing, and it's very upsetting to see. But if it stays in the consciousness of the people, somebody will represent it. You know, somebody will stand up and say, "Well, what we're all thinking is get rid of them all."
Yeah.
And people are thinking that, unfortunately, and that is why this, you know, happens.
And of course, then, you know, it's like this guy. At the end of a speech, he actually has the goal to talk about how the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Against Muslim immigrants, right?
You know,
It's
like what world? But I think that's the world, the nature of hate, nature of unidimensional power. That's and in many ways, I think it's sort of there is an act of until Muslims demand governments that respect the public space and that respect the identity of both the individual as spiritually and intellectually, as well as the you know, you remain locked in this constant process of you know, why do people say get rid of them all? Because they can say that and get away with it. It doesn't. There's no. I mean, can you imagine if someone says this today about they would get targeted and they lose their job and so on. And unless Muslims start, you know, saying, okay, you know, we have to protect ourselves.
Yeah. But the unfortunate thing is also that I have to say that on the one side where I do like a bit the idea of government intervention where it doesn't happen is like, for example, in Great Britain, you know, there is a bit, I mean, the Muslim community in Great Britain is just slowly being very, I mean, you have native Asian British people participating in terrorism on British soil. And I actually think, I wish that some of these governments that are so intent that there not be problems with the Muslim community actually pay some attention to who is imported here and allowed to preach. And these are people that are not allowed to preach in the Arab world, for example. These are people, you know, they had a problem with Mr. Hookhands, whatever, in London, and then they couldn't send him back to Jordan because they knew he would probably be executed or tortured or something else by the Jordanians. Well, this should be a bit of a wake-up call. If you want a good relationship with your Muslim community, be alert to the fact that there are people coming into the country which are not,
This is like the I don't know if you've heard of this, but just before I came, there was this whole thing where the FBI sent an informant, a guy who pretended to convert to Islam, went to a mosque in Irvine, and this guy was so insistent on talking terrorism all the time, and the mosque went and got an injunction against him.
The guy that was the convert.
The convert informant.
Okay. The
yeah.
hypocrite.
So and they got an injunction against him, and so he, of course, then said, well, it is because they suspected of the FBI, so they wanted to preempt them being exposed, so they got this injunction against me. Right. But remarkably, the FBI, based on this guy was a criminal record. It was being paid as much as $30,000 a month.
Wow.
For just going into and saying, yes, Muslims talk about blowing things up all the time, and and people that I personally know, there's no way that they're involved with any of this stuff, and making stuff up, and a guy that ultimately the FBI fired because they started suspecting that he's not giving them correct. Yet to justify the expense of the millions of dollars spent in this operation, they went and arrested a guy on immigration violation charges.
Oh.
And it's just the undercover.
Oh my goodness. You see, so they have no sense of strategy with how to keep this balance in the community because they do outrageous things because basically people don't know anything about Muslims. This is what
and then, of course,
they don't know.
And of course, this unfortunately becomes itself, it's like the Puritan type of person say, see, we told you so,
You found one there, so yeah.
And also the assimilation issue, when they insist so much about the integrating and also, but they don't
know anything about these people.
That's fine, but they insist.
What does it mean for Indonesians to integrate? You don't know anything about Indonesians, so how would you know?
That's a bit ridiculous. But the law about this kind of assimilation is very different, and it's got more.
Very much from the outside.
It's very pragmatic. I mean, if something happened, then they
I was very curious about the construction of taqlid in the intellectual idea of Muslim that sometimes it's blamed. I think for me at the time when I come from the Islamic tradition that say that after Ghazali. That say, the ijtihad has closed or something like that. But how then the construction of the idea is spread within the Muslim intellectual?
You have to trace. The intellectual history of the eve of Muslims at the eve of modernity is very important because. At the same time, colonialism, there was always a military confrontation at first, but after the loss of military confrontation and the persecution of the people who believed in the military confrontation, there is a systematic process, especially in the late 19th and early 20th century, where everyone who's anyone in Muslim educational institutions, cultural institutions, would go study in the West and come back. And they, like Tahsin, they came back with a completely orientalized view of their own tradition. Now, but partly Tahsin, the Oriental discourse mixed law with theology, with history, and it didn't differentiate anything because it was very much like its approach to Muslim philosophy. It constantly, interestingly though, it is now that as Muslim Westerners are getting into the academia, like this whole criticism of the closing of doors of ijtihad and so on, you find most of the interesting intellectual scholarship done that's questioning a lot of this history and a lot of the willingness of Muslim intellectuals to go study in France or England and go back just parroting is actually pioneered by Muslim academics in the West, and people who are again, thriving in autonomous atmosphere, away from attachment to a government. And so, you know, the irony is those who are defending Wahhabism in the United States, for instance, are not Muslims. All Muslim intellectuals or Muslim academics, and it's very interesting because you find like someone like Sherman Jackson, who wrote a whole book on institution of taqlid and so on. Sherman Jackson is a convert to Islam. And you know, he came to the attitude was a defiant attitude towards Orientalists, because to him, he doesn't look at them reverentially. You know, to him, he's an insider to the tradition, and so, and this is it's often it's again, you know, intellectual innovation, intellectual insight, intellectual ability to be critical and balanced and so on, is a state of consciousness. It's merely a state of self-respect. You know, do you respect your subject? Do you respect yourself, or are you trying to find a place to fit in? So to be sort of within the accepted paradigm. So, you know, for instance, all the students of Bernard Lewis, it's not surprising that they parrot what Bernard Lewis taught them. But you start going away from those who were just simply sought to please Bernard Lewis in the US, and you find that, and this is, I think, why there is also the Islamophobic reaction, is that it's a realization, it's waking up to the fact that Muslim academics and Muslim activists and so on have established themselves and are here to stay. And it's sort of like not wanting to share the public space. And so even academia in the United States, in many places you'll find, you know, some schools would have attitude, will never hire a Muslim professor.
But so I experienced we know that sometimes people who, I think, westernized that they school from the Western, but I experienced myself in the madrasa itself, that they say, okay, we just let's say the taqlid or ittiba to this, because you know, the idea about the Islamic law is just finished after the formative period, and then all that we have to do is just to copy or adopt what people say that in the Islamic school itself.
In the madrasas themselves, but you have to ask, the question is, what type of madrasas and what type of jurists continue to exist today? I mean, do it as a historical exercise. Try to identify what you consider to be the last, let's say, even use a standard like the last well-informed, well-educated jurist, and try to see what happened to their fate. Because I'll tell you, in the transformation of I've attended the same madrasas, and in the first years, as a young person, you memorize the Quran, you memorize Hadith, and that's it. I mean, the actual training as a jurist doesn't come till after I've memorized the Quran, and this is a legacy from tradition that has survived, and it in the modern age it ends up alienating a lot of people. You know, not too many people will persevere through. Now, but once I got to the level of passing high school in Islamic madrasas, so to speak, and the more advanced I got, the more you discover that. But jurists who are the jurists, like the people who train me, like Sheikh Khaled Abou El Fadl, for instance, spent 10 years in prison in Egypt, and spent most of his life out of the years he was not in prison. He was living in Kuwait in exile, and then was allowed to So in other words, his experience is mingled with political